Alrighty, so this is going to be my first attempt at a quick walkthrough through Cubicle. Cubicle is a workflow management application for Amazon's Mechanical Turk. It's designed to be an all-in-one tool, so it's the only thing you'll need to have open. You can turn off Hit Forker, Panda Crazy, MTS's Finder and Catcher, as well as any old outdated tools like scrapers and Turkmaster and things like that. You need to turn all those things off. They will interfere with Cubicle's processes. For the most part, Cubicle will kind of do its own thing. It's very much self-directed. You don't need to do a ton with it to interact and to do things. Most of your attention should be on actually working and completing hits. So just as a quick walkthrough, at the top you'll have the Omnibar. This is always going to be displayed to you at any time. It'll show how many hits you've caught for the day. This number right here is going to be how many you've caught out of the 3,800 daily hit cap. Your projected earnings for the day. Just a couple of stats that'll display up here. Also, when there's an update available for Cubicle, that will also display up here, as well as if you don't have masters, there will be a CAPTCHA notice that appears up here in case you hit a CAPTCHA. This is the power button. This turns the application on and off. This will start out the scrapers, the pandas, all of the watchers, and things like that. It'll turn them off or turn them on, so you can turn that off if you're ready to log out for the day. Over here is the alerts window. This is what will display any notifications for things like requesters that you're following when they post. The alerts will pop up here. This is just the audio toggle for the application. You can globally mute it. Right here is sleep mode, and I'm going to skip this for the time being and come back to it a little bit later. But this is one of the more powerful features of the application. You've got your standard minimize and close buttons up here. Over on the left-hand side, you're going to have your navigation panel. You can just flip through all the different parts of the application. It's all in one window. Try to keep things nice and organized and simplistic. There are some ways that you can kind of customize the displays and set up workflows that work for you as well, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But for the most part, the nav bar will be over here. If you size down the application, it will go ahead and collapse the bar for you. So if you have an issue where it won't open, it's because the application is just you've sized it down too much. Um, the dashboard is the first feature application. Obviously, it's pretty standard. You've got some charts and graphs and things like that. Up here, you've got your daily and weekly earnings goals, which you can set in settings down here. You can these buttons will sync your work history. In the background, Cubicle will actually keep your work history updated itself every couple of hours. It'll keep an eye on things, and if you also use the workspace, which we'll get into in a different video, it will also live update these charts and things like that, so you can kind of see your progress throughout the day. Over here, you've just got the stats, and you can swap between them. The other view just has your total approved hits, how many rejections you can get before you fall below 99%, things like that. Down here is your activity. Obviously, I haven't done any hits today, so nothing's displaying here. But you can also you can review hits from here if you want to submit data to Turk Review. Which, if you're using Cubicle, I highly recommend that you review any surveys that you do. You can do it quickly. You don't have to write anything. Just submit your times. Cubicle will use that data to learn not only how fast and or slow you are in relative to other workers, but also use it to kind of customize the hits that it accepts for you, and a lot of cool things like that go on in the background. Your data is very important to making Cubicle function well. So I really highly recommend that if you're going to use the application, if you're going to stick with it, that you just at the end of the day submit all the surveys that you've done. Batch work is generally not going to be as helpful because it's a little bit more difficult to do predictive modeling around batch work. But for surveys especially, I highly recommend that you submit your times. So moving on, that's the dashboard. It's pretty standard, pretty straightforward. Over on this page, we've got the scrapers, and so this is my development version. There's some buttons like this one that may appear that you won't see. These are usually debugging things for users or for myself. So you can safely ignore those, but the scraper is pretty standard. I'm actually not going to turn the application on right now, so we'll come back to it. Over here, you can do some basic filters. For the most part, Cubicle doesn't want you looking at the scraper unless absolutely necessary. So you can set a couple of these things, but for the most part, the scraper is very basic because the overall goal of Cubicle is for you to not be looking at a scraper, but for you to actually be completing work and earning money. Now over here, you can switch to the most available tab, which will show you batches and things like that. This button will actually pop out the scraper, and so one of the things that you can do is if you pop this out, you'll see, okay, well now it's you can kind of set it outside of the main window and sort of set it up how you want. And there are a couple different windows you can do this with: the scraper, the Panda Manager, and also your queue. Cubicle will keep an eye on your queue and give you some data and some cool stuff about what's actually in your work queue. And so you can pop these out, and you just close it, and it pops right back into the window here. Moving on to the watchers. So this is the most important part of Cubicle. There are a couple different watchers. Some you're probably familiar with, some maybe new. Let's start with things that you're probably familiar with, right? Requester watchers. These are pretty basic, just general statistical stuff. So you can see here, I've got a Panda going for Joe Lowe's and Old Wall Street. Wall Street hits, predict Wall Street hits. You do a couple of things with this, and so you can edit this and do a couple different things. You can change the audio alerts that you get or turn them off completely. So all requester watchers in Cubicle rely on the requester ID. It's a lot more efficient. You can have tens of thousands of requester watchers, and Cubicle can still process them in under like 1 or 2 milliseconds. That's generally the goal for every scrape. Um, so it does require the requester ID because it's a little bit easier to for the computer to actually process all that information. You can add notes that you want to read about the requester, like, oh look, see, Jolo's great if he ever comes back. This button is important. This is we'll go back to sleep mode again later and explain it more in depth, but this will allow you to override sleep mode. So say this requester is really important, you want to ignore sleep mode. Even if the application is in sleep mode, you just want to try and accept hits from this requester. You can see I've got the Panda turned on, so it's going to try and Panda the hits. I'm not going to try and ham them. The workspace will just default to my normal settings. This is really important. So for the group, this is the group that the pandas will be put in Cubicle. So all of these groups right here are what we call managed groups. So if the panda that's created is in one of those groups, Cubicle will manage it for you. You don't have to kind of keep an eye on it. It will do its own thing. So if you want to manually control it, you're going to want to put the group into none for almost any panda or watcher that you want to set up. Okay, so minimum reward amount is simply if the requester posts a hit under 25 cents, Cubicle won't try and accept it. Max per project is for every unique hit that the requester posts. Cubicle will only try to accept one, and this is the number that it will want to accept at any given time. Now, for these settings, they're conflicting right now because obviously, if the max total is 1, then I will never have 3 in my queue, but that's just, again, this is my development version, so most of the settings are just randomly generated. Okay, so projects are the same thing, but instead of looking at requesters, you're actually looking at the group ID, which is now the hit set ID. That's the Panda that you would put into your normal Panda Manager, Panda Crazy, or MTS's hit catcher. And again, you can do different things like that. Oh, well, that's the on and off button, but you can set them up differently. Like this one will ham this one. There's no max, so it will try and accept as many as possible. So moving on to the newer watcher types. We have keyword watchers in Cubicle. So you can look for hits that have a certain keyword or a certain pattern in the hit title or the description. And then you can have Cubicle automate actions based on that information. So for me, I really enjoy doing jury hits. regardless of the requester that they come from. And there are a couple who do jury studies where they're basically asking you to be a juror and read a case and then make a decision on it. I tend to enjoy them. So what I've done is I've set up a keyword watcher for the word jury. I'll have it check the title and description, and if Cubicle sees it on the scraper, because everything in Cubicle is all connected and it can share data, um, if if Cubicle sees a hit come through that mentions a jury, it will go ahead and accept the hit for me. Really simple stuff, and I've got the group on none because I want it to put a lot of effort into trying to catch that hit. And then you still have all of the normal settings down here that we went through earlier. So one thing about this though is that there's a special setting for these. Regular expressions, if you're not familiar with them, you should probably just ignore it, but they are ways to do pattern matching against text. So let's say if I want to look at the title of the hit, and if it has the words coin and flip, I can do something like this where I will use a wildcard, so it will match anything in between the words coin and flip. And if it has, if it matches that, it will go ahead and accept the hit if I turn the pandas on and all that good stuff. So you can read a little bit more on regular expressions yourself and kind of get familiar with that if you're not used to it. It's a pretty niche tool, so I wouldn't focus a lot of time or attention on it right now. But it is something that's in there, and it can be useful for a couple different things. Now, moving on to the platform watchers. Platform watchers are the main feature of Cubicle. They're the most important feature by far, and they're what you're going to want to set up right out of the gate. They're what you can set up and then just turn the application on and then ignore it. You go do your work for the day. Platform watchers will look at every single hit that comes across the scraper, and if the hit matches certain parameters that you set up, it will go ahead and attempt to catch that hit for you. Pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of nuance and things that you can do with it. So first of all are your view watchers. This is why I really recommend that you submit your data to TurkerView, because Cubicle will use your personalized data to try and parse which hits you should and should not accept. So the first parameter in every platform watcher is the hourly wages of the hit. So let's say that you've worked for Wharton a couple times, right? Like the surveys from Wharton, and you average $25 an hour on Wharton. Even though the TurkerView general rating may be like $12 or $15 an hour, if your average is $25 an hour and you have this set up right here and turned on, it will go ahead and try and catch Whartons for you. And because it knows that they're very high value and that you have a work history working with them, it will put a little bit more emphasis in trying to catch those hits, as long as other parameters don't override it. So like if another hit comes through that's like $100 an hour, it will put a little bit more effort into those. But in general, like your view watchers are incredibly powerful and they're incredibly important because they insulate you a little bit from some of the statistical noise that can be in TurkerView's data sets. So they're really important. They're good to set up, and for all of them outside of the hourly rating for the requester and hit, it will check and make sure that the minimum award is an amount that you want to work for, and that the max is an amount you want to work for. You can turn them on and off over here, and then delete them. TurkerView watchers are generally the same idea as your view watchers, except for instead of using your personalized data, they will just use TurkerView's database, which is obviously right now it's the biggest data set for Amazon's Mechanical Turk as far as hourly wages and things like that go. So this is generally where you'll catch the most hits until you get set up with the platform and really going. Sorry. So yeah, you'll want to set these up really quickly. I believe on install Cubicle has one inserted for you and turned on. So as soon as you turn on the application, it may start catching work. But you can just come to this page and quickly turn it off or adjust it as you see fit. What you see here with what I've done for mine is I have a couple different tiers. So let's say, so for this one, I actually use when I want to catch really quick surveys. I don't really care what the hourly is. I just want to catch a couple surveys I can like do, when I have a spare 5 or 10 minutes in between tasks. I'll turn this on and so I'll grab a couple surveys and just see what they are and do them real quick because they're not going to be, even if the hourly wage is low, they're not going to take me a ton of time because I set the maximum reward very low as well. Whereas over here, so you can see like this is when I want to make sure that I'm only catching really high value tasks. I've set this one up to be about $20 an hour. I'm comfortable working for that. And I want to catch hits that are actually like a decent chunk of time. So I'm going to go ahead and set my minimum reward to $1 and my maximum reward. I won't put a maximum on that because I just want to catch anything over $1. Generally, again, you'll want to set up a couple of these, find ranges that work for you and that work for your personal workflow and also work for the day. So like on a Monday and Tuesday, you may want to use higher hourly wages because there's more work available on the platform. And so you can be a little bit more picky about what you take in. Now, if you're going to work on a Saturday afternoon, and you're actually trying to work and you're not like just only catching things that will pay you really well, you can use something like this that will, it'll cast a wider net. Now, the thing is that you want to be very careful about what you set your ranges to. You don't want to do something like this. If you do something like this, so if you do something like this, you will not catch a lot of work. It's not going to happen because what's going to happen is that Cubicle is going to try and catch everything that goes by the platform. And the more hits that you are attempting to catch at any one time, the lower your odds of catching any one single hit. Especially high value hits where there are a lot of people competing to catch them and to accept them, you're basically guaranteeing that you will not be able to accept those kind of hits. So please don't do something like this. This is why I believe that like general auto catchers that just look at like the minimum reward amount, say like try and catch $1 or anything like that, are terrible. They're generally horribly inefficient and they're also abusive on the platform. This is one of the things that Cubicle is very carefully designed around is, and we're going to get into this really deeply with the sleep mode function in a second. It's designed to make sure that not only do you have work, but it's work that you can complete. It's work that you want to complete, so you're engaged in the task and like you're paying attention and doing your work. You're not distracted by the scraper. You're not distracted managing all these pandas and doing things like that. But it's also considerate about everybody else on the platform. Cubicle is not designed to accept everything, stuff your queue full, and then it's all going to expire and other people have to panda it or they never get to catch the hit to begin with. It's a very important design principle to me, and if you violate that with these kind of settings, my personal opinion is that more likely than not, if Amazon ever did step in and begin suspending accounts, it would be suspensions to people who do things like this, who just try and accept absolutely everything. They're just bombarding the platform. It's very difficult to manage a workflow doing something like this. So that's a very high level philosophy idea, but in general, again, you want to target work that you really want to complete and at an hourly range that you're comfortable working for and that you can stay attentive for that amount of time. So if a hour-long study is going to be $10 an hour, maybe you will only pay attention for 30 minutes. You can set the maximum reward to $5 and then it won't catch anything that should take you more than 30 minutes or so to complete at this hourly range. So you can do a lot of things like that. Just like the requester watchers, you can put in almost a limitless amount of watchers. You should be careful that some don't conflict with each other. It's actually okay if they do. Cubicle will just accept the first one that matches. So like if we did something like this where we set $10 an hour with a 10-cent minimum reward and maximum reward of, we don't have a maximum reward. So if we turned both of these on, these are kind of a waste, right? Because anything that's $10 an hour and that's over 10 cents is going to be fired on this watcher. And it's always going to, you see what I mean? How like this one overrides this one. It's not a big deal, but it can clutter up the workspace. Now down here you have an unrated watcher. Because all of these rely on statistical data either from your work history being submitted to TurkReview or TurkReview's general history. Um, Cubicle does provide a way to accept hits from requesters who don't have any ratings yet. Some people like this, some people don't, and that's why it's an option. Uh, the only thing you really have to go on there is the minimum and maximum reward amounts, and Cubicle will also do a couple of other checks in the background. Things like so Cubicle will not or will try to avoid accepting other people's compensation hits, things like that in the background. So it does go through a couple of extra quality checks, but for the most part, all you can really do is minimum and maximum reward. It's highly recommended that you submit data for any requesters that you accept hits for. It makes sure that the tool keeps functioning not only for you but for everyone else, and generally like it leads to a more quality experience because the app can start using your information to actually customize your work experience. So yeah, those are available. Unrated requesters can be a little bit risky to work for. Generally, it's not a problem for people with a large amount of approved hits already, but it's something to consider. So there, from the Watchers tab, we also have blocks. You could ignore requesters temporarily. So if there's a requester who spams a bunch of hits, but you don't necessarily want to block them entirely, you can just mute them on the scraper. And oh, actually, you know what? Let's go back to this real quick. So we have a couple of these on. What I'm gonna do is just turn on the scraper now so that we can kind of see how this works, and it'll flow into the next thing really well. Alrighty, so we've turned on our scraper. It's run a couple scrapes. We have the most available. This is basically like a giant batch scraper, which will show you, it'll sort by the most available hits. As all of these run concurrently, and Cubicle does its own management of all of the scraping of NTurk, so you actually don't have to um, set up a bunch of different scrapers. Cubicle does all that stuff automatically by itself, and kind of figures out what is what behind the scenes, and then sorts it and then displays it to you. Um, so you've got your most available here. As Cubicle does more scrapes, it will show you basically the velocity that the batch is moving at. So if you see a batch that has a very high drop rate, so like the total number of hits is going down very quickly, you might want to go look at that batch because these people are working on it. It may be of interest to you. Or if you've looked at it and you're like, okay, well, I don't think this is worth my time, maybe it's worth a second look. You've got masters. The little red M just means masters. You can hide those if you need. Any requesters that are highlighted in green are on your watch list, are on your requester watch list. So let's go back to the main tab or the main scraper page. There are two split scrapers right here. These are likely batches. They're ones that have a couple more available hits than normal. This is a good thing to keep an eye on in case you're interested in new batches as they post, because obviously this is just the overall. This is everything that posts on the platform. I know that some people are used to Hit Forker where it's kind of split. You've got one on the top that is just like a mess. You can't click on anything and all that stuff. This is designed a little bit differently. So it will keep the hits ordered in a normal log fashion, and then if a hit reposts after a certain amount of time, it will go ahead and reinsert it at the top. But generally, it's a lot less. It's a lot less hectic, especially after you get a couple of scrapes in. These kind of hits right here, even if you don't have them blocked, won't consistently be at the top. They'll scroll down to the bottom after 4 or 5 minutes. They may repost to the top as Cubicle kind of resorts everything. But generally, it's a little bit more refined scraper. So if you do have to look over at it and check out what's going on, you can do so without everything jumping around at you. So one thing to note is that a lot of options are hidden in the right click menu. Um, so you can create watchers, block the requester, you can launch the contact, all that kind of stuff. The same for the hit. You can export this to your favorite forum. as you wish. And then the Panda options, you can Panda it once. You can create a manual Panda, which will just open that form that just popped up. So yeah, you can create a manual Panda, however, you can set the settings how you need and all that kind of stuff. Or you can just copy the group ID for whatever you may need it for. The pay, when it displays the pay button like this, you can click that to try and accept the hit once without actually without creating an actual panda in the Panda Manager. This will create a panda, and then this will create a panda that has a maximum cap of 1. So if you see something in the batch tab that you want to panda really quick, you're going to want to use this. Whereas if you see a survey up here, you're going to want to use the once panda. This displays Turk reviews, hourly data, and then this is your view hourly data. So this is actually a really, okay, so this is a good and bad example all at the same time, right? James Billings is a terrible requester. Like, there's no reason for you to work for him. This is actually accurate for what wages you can expect, right? So here, Turk review is a little bit more accurate than my personal experience with James Billings. I only ever did one hit for him, and I did get a decent bonus. So my hourly wages are $13 an hour. Now, if you go back to my watchers over here, I would try and catch this hit if the minimum reward wasn't 35 cents. I would try and catch this hit, even though it would not fire on any of the Turk review watchers. And this is why it's really, really, really important that you submit data to Turk review, because it gives you this insulation to where if your data is obviously, like, your data is always going to be more accurate to your personal work experience, and so it allows Cubicle to make more intelligent decisions for you, which is the entire point. It won't do that inside of hits, it only does it outside of hits, which is, as far as as far as we know, aligned with Mechanical Turk's terms of service. But if this was actually a good requester, and maybe some people just had an unfortunately bad experience, like maybe only 2 or 3 people reviewed it, I was one of them, the other 2 people did really poorly, I could still catch the hit in the future if it was worth my time. This little orange icon just means that it's new, the first time that Cubicle Scraper has seen the hit. Yeah, so this is just the first time the Cubicle Scraper has seen the hit. These will go away eventually as new hits post to the platform. It's a Saturday, and so it'll probably be there for the whole time. Now I'm looking at this. You've got the normal information, the title of the hit. You can this will block the hit. This will block the requester. This will quickly create a requester watcher. All that kind of stuff. You can see the qualifications if you click on this, and there are okay. So yeah, you can see all the qualifications. Does it have a test? You can take the test. This is I already have that qualification. So yeah, but you can see all the information for the hits that you click. Now this icon right here. Oh, okay, so you can see, like, Rappy is Vacation Rental API is reposting these hits, and so they were down here. And since it's been a couple minutes now, it's been like 5 minutes. They've gone ahead, or Cubicle has gone ahead and put them back into your vision, since it's been a little while, but they are still posting the hits. This is generally important for things like all of Turk Prime or Cloud Research hits tend to be reposted in very small amounts all day to avoid MTurk's 40% fee. So this kind of behavior is generally ideal when you take into account the overall context of the platform, while still making the scraper readable, right? Like, if we loaded up Hit Forker, it would just be a constant cycle of a bunch of things that you've already seen before, and it's very difficult for a human to look at. Even though Cubicle tends to want to look at the scraper for you, it does also make it human readable as much as possible. So you can see, okay, these are some brand new hits. Maybe you need to check them out for the day. Probably not, because these are terrible, but you can see that. Now, on this hit right here, this is really important. This little drone icon means that the hit has matched one of your watchers, and Cubicle has already started panning it for you. That is actually already in my queue. Cubicle has already accepted this hit for me. But in general, the green drone icon is a hit that Cubicle has tried to accept for you, and so you don't have to do anything here, right? Unless, let's say this hit was worth $91 instead of 91 cents, you might want to go to the Panda Manager and take it away from Cubicle's automatically managed groups, but in general, this icon means that Cubicle has already started a Panda for it and will attempt to catch it. So if we actually go down to the Panda Manager now and look at some of these things, this is really important to look at. So all of these are old. They're all grayed out. There's nothing going on here. You can ignore them for the most part. Cubicle will clean these out after a while, so you actually don't have to really organize the Panda Manager very much. You can generally ignore it, except for if there's like a very high value hit that you really, really, really want to catch. So let's look at this hit, right? So let's say um, let's look at a couple of things first. Obviously, you've got the title, the group ID, the actual group of the panda, which is important. We're going to get to the action, which this has to do with the workspace. You can either do it by the default settings. So if you have the workspace enabled, it will put the hit in the workspace. Or if you have it disabled, it won't do it. You can override that by none. None will never open, even if this panda is caught, it will never open in the workspace, or always will always open it in the workspace, even if you have the workspace disabled. Again, we'll get into that in a different video. So you can see the max right here. Cubicle would only try and catch one of these hits. The Q cap is the number it would try to, the max that it would hold in your queue at any one time. The accepted column, this is how many hits have actually been accepted. And so you can see it's got a pretty good catch rate going on right here. And then the attempts column. So the attempts column and the group column tie in together. And right now you can see that there are no pandas on. So this is going to be a little bit complicated. When a panda is in Cubicle's managed groups, so any of the default groups like TV Watcher, RID Watchers, Your View, Unrated, all those things, Cubicle is going to manage all of those pandas for you. It's going to turn them on. It's going to turn them off in the background. So right now there are technically no pandas on. You can see 0 active pandas in the background. Cubicle is actually still trying to catch this hit. And you can see right here, it did catch it. So this was, I believe that this was marked on 1 for a long time, but in the background, Cubicle was still trying to catch them because the app is on and you're working, you're actively working. So in the background, even if you have no pandas going, Cubicle is doing a ton of work. It's looking at everything that is in your Panda Manager. It's looking at what's going on in its overall data set. So all Cubicle users are connected in some ways. So if you return a hit, your version of Cubicle will send out a message to everybody else and say, "Hey, I'm returning this hit." If it's in your Panda Manager, go ahead and try and catch it at certain times. I've done a lot of work to look at like the statistics as far as when the hit becomes available after being returned, catch rates, things like that. And so, your application broadcasts that out to everyone else, and everyone else shares that information back with you. And so, even if you have no pandas going, Cubicle is still doing work and trying to make sure that you have something to do, even if nothing new has posted. So right now in the background, this is actually probably still trying to be caught, even though none of them are on. Now, right now it's still in the managed group. So let me show you what's going to happen. I'm going to manually turn the panda back on. It's going to do one attempt and then turn off. Okay, so this is because it's in the managed group. So let's say that this hit was worth $91 instead of 91 cents. And I'm like, man, I really, really, really want Cubicle to try and catch this hit specifically. What you're going to want to do is take it out of the managed groups and put it into none, or you can kind of create your own groups as well. And then if I turn it back on, it will stay on. Cubicle will no longer override what's going on here. It will still try only to accept one. So if you want to accept like 2 or 3, then you need to change that as well. But in general, if you want to override Cubicle's control, you're just going to want to make sure that you change the group drop-down setting. Otherwise, Cubicle will do its own thing here. Now, let's say that this is in this. Let's say that we didn't change this and we just left it going. Right now, in the background, Cubicle may or may not be trying to catch it. As other things come in, Cubicle will load balance how many attempts it makes. So if you only have one panda on, it will probably try and catch that hit for 3 or 4 minutes. And then it'll turn it off and move on to more high priority things. And then Again, it will look for when people return the hit. It'll do a little bit with when people review the hit. It will kind of update that information so that it knows when people are most likely to complete it. And also, so for this one specifically, uh, short product survey. Alrighty, so this one has an hour duration to it, right? So what's going to happen here is that if in the background Cubicle never catches this hit until or in about 55 60 minutes when it's about to expire, Cubicle will go ahead and turn this Panda back on in anticipation of anyone who may be running like less advanced tooling, who accepted the hit and never even started it, and it's just going to expire out of their queue. Cubicle will go ahead and turn this back on and try and catch it as it expires if it wasn't returned or caught in the background throughout that time. So in general, again, Cubicle really doesn't want you looking at this kind of stuff. These are the kind of decisions that machines make incredibly well, because machines don't get tired. Machines can do math really quickly. It knows, how long it's been running, when it's going to expire. It can keep track of all of that information for you, and so there's generally no reason for you to be in here very actively unless there's something manually that you're working on that you need to Panda and do things like that. But all the information is presented and available to you. Um, as far as the rest of the UI goes, so your PRE rate is displayed right here. You can actually ignore it unless you have the app on for maybe like 15 to 20 minutes and it's still very high, and I mean like 30-40%. You should just ignore this. First of all, it doesn't update so you can see it still says one active Panda. And there's nothing active anymore. This information doesn't update anymore because Cubicle does so much work in the background that it's just not useful information to the user. Cubicle is very integrated with the way that AWS, which is like Amazon's uh, it's Amazon's overarching web uh, infrastructure. I've done a lot of research into how it works and things like that. So Cubicle is very tied into how MTurk works in the background, how it interacts programmatically, and all those kind of things. And so the page request rate and all those kind of things are managed silently by the application now. It will make sure that it's not calling Amazon too much, that it's not exploding things as much as possible. They do make changes, and then I have to fix the app, of course. But because all of that stuff is so complicated in the background, it's not helpful to display this information to the user. The only reason that it still exists at all is because if you have something like Panda Crazy still going, right? If for some reason you have Cubicle and Panda Crazy or Hit Forker going on in the background, then this will explode to like 30 or 40%, and something else is using page requests that you need to go turn off. And that's generally like the only reason that this even still exists as a number. If you're in the generally Cubicle will aim for 4 to 5% error rate. You don't want 0%. If you're at 0%, then you're not calling MTurk nearly as much as you could. And because of some of the ways that MTurk processes request, you do want a couple of page request errors thrown in there because of the way that you want to accept things like high value hits and stuff like that. But that's all very technical. But in general, you can ignore this. Um, so rebounders is when this turns back on in a couple minutes, when the hit is about to expire. We call that a rebound catcher. Um, the sound is just there for me. You'll hear it. It's a boing sound. You should turn that off if it's not already off by default. You can turn on sound and push bullet for when you catch things. It's important to note that in the settings, there's a cooldown timeout. So if the cooldown timeout is 10 minutes, it will only send one sound alert every 10 minutes that you catch a hit. That way, it's not just blaring at you every 2 seconds. You can set it that way, but by default, it's not going to blare at you every 2 seconds. It's meant to be a notification so that if you want to set up Cubicle and walk away from your computer and go, do the dishes or hang out with your kids, whatever it is that you want to leave the computer and go do, Cubicle is meant to get your attention to come back. It's not supposed to sit there and blare at you every 2 seconds, screaming every time it catches something, because it would drive you crazy. So you can set the how often that repeats, but in general, you should leave it pretty. You should only use them as notifications that you need to come back to the computer, not that it's caught something. Um, so the visibility filters, there's a bug on first install that you may want to um, just open this up real quick, click on one, and then click select all groups. I'm still trying to track down that bug, but here you can create your own custom group. So custom group, you can add that really quick, and then okay. So if you want to, let's say, so again, let's say that you want to um, you want to take this out of cubicles control, but you don't want to. You want to actually like organize it nicely. You can go ahead and put it in your custom group. All right, you may need to reboot. Okay, so that's a bug as well that I need to fix. But in general, you can put them into your own groups. You can hide inactive ones and only display active ones if you want. You can also reorder them just by dragging them up and down, however you see fit. Again, generally, like you shouldn't interact with this window very often. You can pop them out in case you do want to keep an eye on it. All those kind of cool things. This right here is your qualifications. Just like your work history, Cubicle will automatically sync these every once in a while. Just so if you ever need to look over your qualifications, you can hop in here and see what your values are. Hiding spam calls is generally like you can toggle this on to see like it'll remove a bunch of qualifications that are just kind of system noise. Turk Prime generates like hundreds of exclusions for every requester that they work with. So you can hide those. You can sync manually if you want to update it. This is set to update every couple of days right now. Um, it's just not very high value information, but in general, Cubicle will keep it somewhat up to date for you in case you want to ignore it. Right here is the script manager. This has to do with the workspace. You can ignore it for the time being. If you want to import some scripts, you can do so if you plan on using the workspace. But for the most part, this is more attached to the workspace, and we'll go over it in that video. So in general, that should be most everything. And you can see the alerts up here. You can clear them out, do whatever. And they immediately regenerate, of course, because their requester is still posting over here. So yeah, that should be the general information. And so just during the course of this video, when I turned it on, it's caught whatever all this work is that I'm about to return and not complete. But this is also the workspace. We'll do this in a second video. But you can see like just running whatever I had set up here, it looks like I had pretty high thresholds to accept. It still went ahead and caught me a decent amount of work, even for a Saturday, while being pretty choosy, which is the general goal of the application. Again, like you should be able to turn it on and it will do all of the heavy lifting as far as like actually putting work in front of you and getting you ready to complete your day. On that note, let me do this also. So sleep mode. Let's say I'm ready to head to bed. Let's assume it is 10 p.m. Eastern, and I'm gonna go to bed for the night. I'm not gonna complete any more work right now. I've cleared out my queue. So all right. So it's Saturday night. I'm gonna wake up at Sunday, and I'm gonna wake up at Sunday. I'm gonna wake up at 8 a.m. and I am going to drink my coffee, eat breakfast, do all those things, and I want to come and sit down at my computer at 9 a.m. and begin working. So what I'm going to do before I go to sleep is I'm going to turn on sleep mode. And what sleep mode is just a way to let Cubicle know that you are away from the computer for a period of time that is substantial and that you want Cubicle to be very intelligent about what it accepts. So in this situation, I'm going to wake up at 8 a.m. and I want to sit down at my computer and start work at 9 a.m. So I'm going to set it for tomorrow at 9 a.m. and then hit sleep. So what's going on here is that Cubicle is now in sleep mode. The scraper is still running. The scraper is still going to do its thing. New hits will come through. Cubicle will continue to look at them and judge them by the watchers and all of that stuff that we've already gone over. The difference being is that Cubicle will only accept hits that have enough time on them so that when I sit down at 9 a.m., I can actually complete that hit. So obviously, there's a lot of background math involved. This is again why submitting your data is really important because it's going to take into account how quickly you work, if it can. It's going to take into account how many hits you already have in your queue. So let's say that, so I'm going to start work again 20 hours from now. It's going to continue to look at work right now. And let's say this hit post, but instead of the 75-minute duration, let's say this had a 24-hour duration. Now it's a $5 hit at about $10 an hour. So this hit, according to Cubicle, will probably take me somewhere close to 30 minutes to complete, right? So if this had a 24-hour timer, it would go ahead and accept this hit because it knows that there are 4 extra hours and that I'm only going to take 30 minutes to complete the hit. So that leaves 3.5 hours between me sitting back down and starting work and me actually like being able to work on and complete this hit. So while I'm sleeping or while you're sleeping, Cubicle will continue to look at everything on the platform that comes through. It will continually look at like how long it is before you come back, how much work you have in your, how much work it's already accepted that's already waiting for me at 9 a.m. And do all of that math for you while you're asleep. Keep an eye on the platform. This is also why like Cubicle asks for your Enter credentials so that it can keep you logged in overnight. Worst case scenario, it can just log itself back in, do all those kind of things. This is actually a really important feature for people who work full time on MTurk, right? Like if you start your day when you check in at a normal job, the second you clock in, you're getting paid. Generally for MTurk, it's very difficult to set that up and have that going on because for the most part, you have to load up all your tools, you have to turn them on, you have to start looking at hits and all those kind of things. So this really eliminates that problem almost completely, hopefully for most people. But it's also good. Let's say that you're working on a Monday afternoon and Cubicle has just accepted way too much work for you, right? Like you've just got right here, like, okay, so I turned it on and I walked away, I got distracted, and now I've got all this work and it's going to be, so, I have the estimated completion time takes into account my data, TurkReview's data, all the parameters for the hit and things like that. And it's like, okay, so I'm already overloaded. I already have things expiring. I can go ahead and turn it on. I can turn it on sleep mode for like, let's say, okay, I need an hour, right? So give me an hour. Um, I think it's going to take me about an hour to clear out my queue, get steady, get ready to go. So right now, what Cubicle is doing is it's still checking everything and just making sure that it's not overloading me, right? So it's only going to accept things that once I've got this cleared out, it will uh, have more work ready for me to go when I come back and I'm ready to go, right? It'll have more work ready for me. And, but right now it's not overloading me. It's not accepting hits that I'm not going to be able to complete before I can clear all this out, which is actually really important on MTurk because, again, I touched on this earlier. Turk Prime reposts a lot of hits. So if you accept a hit from Turk Prime, um, and then don't complete it, they're not going to let you back in. Even if you can catch it again, for the most part, you'll get that message, you've already completed too many hits, or whatever the error message is that they display. So you really don't want to accept more work than you can actually complete. And even outside of sleep mode, Cubicle tries to keep a little bit of a balance, but it's much more aggressive attempting to collect hits because you never know, when work is actually going to post and when things are going to be available to you. Whereas sleep mode is much more reserved, it's much more relaxed. There are some workers who actually keep sleep mode going all the time, and there are days where I do this, where I'll set it for 30 minutes and I'll just bump up the timer 10 minutes every once in a while, just so that like I have a nice flow of work coming into my queue. Um, so yeah, that's probably one of the more important features of Cubicle, but I didn't want to explain it without explaining all of this because because Cubicle is an all-in-one application, it looks at all of this information all at once very quickly, does all the math and all the decision making that you really want to do, right? Like as a conscientious worker, you want to make all these decisions, you make them really well. You want to make sure that you're not accepting more than you can do. You're not returning a bunch of hits. Things don't expire while you're working on them. That's never a good situation because then you don't get paid for that time. The requester doesn't get their data. So Cubicle is trying to do all these things for you and manage it for you so that you can focus on the hit, right? Like I can keep this on and I can hop into this survey over here and I can give my full attention to the survey, knowing that in the background, Cubicle is taking care of all those things for me. So hopefully that's a decent explanation of the application. This is running into 50 minutes, so I think I'm definitely going to have to cut this down. Again, this is the first time I ever tried to do something like this. Would love feedback on it. But yeah, hopefully that explains almost everything. Again, I'll save the workspace for a different video because it's pretty in depth. If you want, just before, so you're not getting overwhelmed, you can go to the settings tab. I'm not clicking on it because it displays like your email and stuff like that. It does hide your passwords, but it does display your email. So you can actually turn the workspace off and none of these hits will generate. But the workspace is generally just an organized way to complete your work. But yeah, that should be the general overview of Cubicle. A little in depth, a lot of information, but for the most part, you can literally just turn it on, set these up, and then just go back to your regular browser and start working for the time being. And it should be a dramatic improvement on anything like Forker and scripts like that.